Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as founder and chairman of the Arab International Women's Forum, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to our webinar today, held in partnership with PwC, our valued global partner. I take this opportunity to express our deep thanks and appreciation to Hani Ashkar, Territory Senior Partner for PwC Middle East and AIWF Valued Board Member, for all cooperation extended and for moderating today's webinar session. The Arab International Women's Forum is a nonprofit, non-governmental, independent development organization set up in 2001 to support the empowerment of women in all sectors in the Arab region and always within a global context. Since its inception, AIWF has given very special focus in its programs on women's economic empowerment, job creation, and education. From the outset, we are proud to have worked and continue to work with a coalition of partners that include governments, multinational organizations, private sector, civil society, universities, and the media to effect positive change. At AIWF, we are exceptionally proud of our continued collaboration with PwC, which has been a long-standing AIWF global partner, as well as a key program partner for our very highly successful Young Arab Women Leaders Initiative and series of conferences, which champion diversity and inclusion for women in the region and highlighted their critical role in the regional economic and social development. AIWF commends the PwC Middle East leadership team for its dedication to empowering women executives, supporting diversity, and driving inclusion in the workplace in the region and beyond. The subjects of our session today are most timely and will undoubtedly deliver high-level and dynamic discussions. First, on the dual impacts of COVID-19 and the oil price drop on the region's economies. And second, on how to create a competitive workforce in the region by 2030. We are especially honored to welcome Dr. Yahya Anouti and Carol Stubbings as our distinguished keynote speakers this morning. And I thank you, Dr. Yahya and Carol, for accepting our invitation and joining us today. We're also honored to welcome valued participants from the Arab region and across the world who have joined us. It gives me great pleasure now to invite you, Hani, to deliver your remarks, and I thank you again for leading our session today. Thank you, Hani.
Thank you, Mrs. Al-Kailani, Haifa. Our partnership with AIWF comes from our genuine belief in the mission that AIWF stands for, and we all want to create a better future for our region, for our societies, and for our communities, for women of this generation and beyond. This is why at PwC we have always striven to have a diverse and inclusive environment where all of our colleagues can belong to the leading professional services firm in our region to advance their careers and to help our clients and our communities develop and grow to the level that we all aspire to. We have worked with AIWF on many conferences and launched the Young Arab Women Leaders, the Voice of the Future series. We're a proud supporter of AIWF, and we have been for many years and will continue to do so. So with that, and thank you again, Haifa, we're delighted, and I'm delighted to moderate today's webinar. And with me, I have two very distinguished speakers, partners at PwC, leaders in their respective fields. And first, we'll start with Dr. Yahya Anouti, who is a partner with Strategy and part of our network, and a member of the firm's energy, chemicals, and utilities practice in the Middle East. He is an expert in the energy space. He's also co-author with the World Bank of local content policies in the oil and gas sector and has co-authored the paper around the dual shock of COVID-19, lower oil prices in our region. He'll speak to us about that today. And then just to preview the second part of the webinar, I'm delighted that Carol Stubbings, who is actually our global tax and legal services leader, will join us. And Carol has led thinking around workforce of the future, and I'm sure you'll find her session very engaging. Please feel free as we start to post your questions using the Q&A feature on the bottom right of your screen. We'll try to get to the questions that you post, and those questions will follow each of Yahya's sessions and Carol's sessions. So we'll do each session, then questions, the second session, and then the questions, and then we'll wrap up on the hour. So with that, could I hand over to Dr. Yahya, if you don't mind, to take us through your session, please.
Thanks a lot, Hani, for the introduction, and thanks, Mrs. Kilani, for the invite. Before starting with the content of this presentation, I just want to echo again what Hani shared in terms of our pride in this partnership with the AIWF and the work you are leading in the region and around the women's agenda. So, as Hani said, we've been looking closely at the COVID-19 and the oil price shock, and what we call the dual shock, because the pandemic has brought down also oil prices, and in a region where oil prices constitute a big portion of the GDP, of exports and government revenues, this also has a staggering effect on the economy. Overall, around the world, the pandemic has been a wake-up call on the hazards and the vulnerabilities that we are exposed to. As you can see on this map, the number of cases is on an increase, and the number of countries with over 100,000 confirmed cases. This map keeps on changing on weekly basis, with unfortunately more countries joining the pink group. The analysis we are compiling from the different international organizations imply that the world economy is going to shrink, and this shrinkage depends on the economic construct of each country and the region. We are talking about, for some countries, a double-digit potential recession. Global trade has fell by 13 to 32%, depending on the region we are looking at. FDI, foreign direct investment, is also on an extreme accelerated decline, expected around 40%, and around 200 million jobs are exposed to losses globally. In addition to this economic impact, we see social impact, which is related to the food security, the availability of a loss of income, which is pushing people down into the hunger, lack of access to essential health services in many countries and across like some countries in the African continent and Latin America, and in addition to the lack of availability of ICU-related equipment. The pandemic is neither the first nor the last natural hazard that we are exposed to. And if we look at our history, there has been hurricanes, there has been heat waves, climate change related stuff, earthquakes. So it's not the first, and it's not gonna be the last. Add to that in terms of hazards, we are getting exposed to man-made hazards related to terrorist attacks, cybersecurity attacks. So this is a call to rethink the vulnerability and the resilience economic development model in the region. But if I focus more on the region and use this pandemic and the dual shock, we observe that there are three drivers to rethink the economic growth model in the region. Number one is there are some sectors that were highly exposed to the pandemic and to the oil price shock, and thus they created they were exposed to a big economic shock from the pandemic and the oil price, in addition to national security vulnerabilities, be it healthcare security, pharmaceutical availability, or the food security, given the bans by some countries in exporting some food-related products. The second thing is that we have witnessed economic diversification plans from the early 70s, but this macroeconomic volatility that we are experiencing with the fluctuation in oil price is a second call to rethink economic diversification in the region, especially in the context that we have been experiencing flattening growth of some of the diversification platforms in specific countries in the region around real estate, around retail, and in some places around tourism. Third, we have been living in a world where it has been reshaped by some megatrends, and we observe that the pandemic is going to accelerate some aspects of these megatrends, be it the globalization that we have been observing, the sustainability agenda, and also the industrial technology, the fourth industrial revolution, and the technological applications that come with that. So keeping these three drivers in mind, the economic development and diversification paradigm of the region should shift towards realizing 5 imperatives. First, we got to refocus on safeguarding citizens' well-being and national security, be it food, be it health, be it defense, energy, water, and other basic need aspects of life. Second, we gotta leverage the economic value of consumption and minimize the reliance on external exports, and use this opportunity once and for all to retain economic value and use that in order to prosper industrial development and economic development in the region. Third, we are all aware of the fourth industrial revolution, and we gotta shift towards accelerated growth and shift the investments toward these future growth platforms, be it in biotechnology, be it in agri-technology, artificial intelligence, or the other aspects of the industrial revolution. The fourth imperative of growth is we have to rethink our competitive advantages and capitalize on them, whether these are existing or new ones to be created. And finally, we have to focus on the sectors where there is multiplier values. There are backbone economic sectors, whether the financial sector, education, where the multiplier effect is very high. They have stagnated in their growth, and we gotta focus on them in order to unlock the multiplier value from these sectors. When I talk about the competitive advantage, many countries and many resource-rich, oil-rich countries in the region have built their competitive strength around the 4 aspects you see here on the left side. We have developed the value proposition of a place to live in, whether in the entertainment, the cost of living, the human citizen-related and value proposition, the abundance of fossil fuel resources, whether it's feedstock, oil feedstock, or whether it's electricity and cheaper electricity with competitive prices. We have been generous with providing competitive financial incentives and access to capital. And finally, there has been major investments around industrial infrastructure. But we gotta shift the paradigm into the new and the to-be-created competitive advantage. We gotta think of how we turn the economies in the region into a place where people wanna learn, where wanna innovate, wanna have their startups, and wanna retire in the region. We wanna capitalize on the renewable resources. We want to think of the new oil of the future. How can we capitalize on the renewable energy resources we have in the region to pioneer the hydrogen economy and potentially export hydrogen, whether to Europe or to Japan, in a competitive way, especially with the drop in the prices and the recent bids we have been seeing in the region. Fourth, it is a no-brainer that we gotta go into the talent 4.0 and to adapt and adopt the advanced technologies that are covered on Industry 4.0. And my colleague here, Carol, will dive deeper into the talent agenda. And finally, we have built industrial infrastructure, but we gotta do the second generation of this infrastructure to be digitally enabled infrastructure, and also adopting the circular economy and the sustainability concept of these that would create a lot of value. So it's a paradigm shift in how we used to see our competitive advantages into creating new ones in order to recover and regrow with a new economic development paradigm. If I wanna translate this into the development model of the future, we think of 4 verticals stuff related to smart import substitution, not going to the imports list and trying to localize that, but think of how can we localize to win in the 2030s? How can we inject innovation? How can we capitalize on R&D in order to create new products that we can substitute in terms of imports? Second, we have an industrial base, and some countries have an advantage related to Industry 4.0. We got to capitalize on that and think of digital manufacturing. And third, we got to go and invest in biotechnology and invest in agri-technology, which is linked to our food security and health security value proposition. Finally, the fourth pillar that we got to consider is related to the maximizing the productivity of our existing base. We have today existing base of entrepreneurs, of SMEs, and we have to help them and enable them, whether through financial incentives or capability building, in order to maximize the benefit and the economic contribution of these players to the economy. And with all these four vertical pillars, what's important is to once and for all fix the enablers. There are things that we all know about, the talent development story, the governance story, the policies that and regulations that we have to refresh, the innovation and R&D infrastructure. So we have to fix these. And also we got to rethink how we go and tackle our priorities through adopting an agile government operating model, where we get all the stakeholders to align on one goal, whether it's biotech, bringing in the healthcare with the academia, with the research-related entities, with agricultural applications, industrial applications, bringing all these players together, not in separation from the investment arms who have been doing great investments abroad, but how can we capitalize on these also, bringing all the players together in order to go after the economic development and the shift and the paradigm that we aspire to achieve. So, in summary, the pandemic is a wake-up call for all the countries in the region. And we got to capture this opportunity. It's a unique opportunity to go, and we should not leave it without disrupting and innovating. We should shift our paradigm and economic development towards, and here I'm only covering the economic development story, that should also be linked to the inclusive growth and to women's contribution into the development agenda, and also the vulnerable population in our region.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Yahya. And I have a couple of questions that I'll ask as people warm up with any other questions they have. And I also believe Haifa has a question for you. But let me just start with a quick one. I mean, you laid out a lot of homework, a huge agenda for our regional governments, and a lot to do. The world is transforming in a big way. How confident are you that we're on this agenda, that people realize that the current model is not very sustainable? And is there a sense of urgency out there? I mean, can you give us a flavor for how much this is front and center on regional government agendas?
Yeah, sure, Hani. So in all the discussions we are part of, and some of it is in the public news, nowadays you get the security of supply is the header and is at the center stage of all leadership discussion. So looking at the food security, at the healthcare security is on the top of the agenda of the leadership. And what we try to push through our work is that we gotta take care of that, but let's take care of it in a competitive way and in a way that would allow us to win in the 2030s, leveraging in the latest technologies, transforming our universities and education system to build the capabilities for the future. So it's a unique opportunity over there. In addition to this security paradigm shift, the exposure that the different sectors got in the economies in light of the pandemic has been a wake-up call, and everybody is asking us, how shall we channel the stimulus packages that we are thinking of? Which sectors do we bet on, and how can we ensure that we are building a resilient model going forward?
Great, thank you. Haifa, did you have a question that you wanted to ask?
Thank you, you, Dr. Yahya, for a very impressive and very really sound wake-up call as well as analysis of the current situation. I'm so happy that you mentioned more than once agri-tech, the investment in the agriculture sector. As a development economist that has been having a great deal of interest in economic security, food security, water security in the MENA region, this has been a very important subject for me, as well as, of course, when it comes to women, we know how hard women work in the rural sector, not only in our region, all over the world. So now the pandemic has exposed our food security. It has also exposed our need to conserve water, the scarce water resources that we have. So how best you can see we can use this opportunity, as you very well mentioned, to invest in agri-tech and make it not one big white elephant project that costs $100 million, make it more what I believe in: smart agriculture, small-scale farming that can cover a wider spread and really reach the poverty level in the community. You know, this is where you find poverty in the rural areas. How can we use this agri-tech in a widespread manner and make it work? Thank you.
Sure. So from the work that I've been witnessing over the recent years in the region is that we usually treat agriculture in many countries. Ministry of Agriculture is separate from the water agenda, and we usually put water with energy, especially in the countries where desalination is energy intensive. What we have been witnessing recently, and especially nowadays after the pandemic, I'm talking about fresh discussions of a few weeks ago, is the integration between agriculture, which is food, the energy, and the water nexus. We have been hearing about this nexus in academic papers, but now I'm very proud and see it and being part of some of these discussions to make it happen through the application of the integrated water resource management models for the allocation and bringing in the food security agencies. For the food security agencies, we used to talk about that we need to achieve the food security regardless of the water stress that it's going to embark with some investments abroad. But once we are bringing in all the stakeholders together and we adopt this integrated water resource management and the nexus model discussions, it's great how everybody is seeing the value and the trade-offs between the different decisions that you would go after. And this is the best forum where we are having the technology stories. This is where we are bringing in the agri-tech stories, whether it's hydroponics or other aspects of it and the small-scale farming. This is where we are bringing in, because you have to break the traditional thinking of having these large farms where people used to think there are economies of scale from this, where we bring in the digital, the new next generation of agri-technology into the discussion, where we put the dollar and the sustainability and the job trade-off. And I'm also happy to report that when we're talking about job, we are having the discussion around jobs for women and pharma. Localization of the pharma industry, it brings more jobs for the women. And this is great, and this is the right time, whether in healthcare security or in food security, we are driving this discussion forward. And I'm personally positive on making a change in the region around this topic.
That's great. Yahya, I'm not sure if you can see the question, but it's asking about oil prices. Are we talking about the drop in oil prices or about prices of oil and gas? Could you comment on that, please?
So we're talking. So oil and gas, the correlation between oil and gas has been weakened recently. And when we talk about gas, there are three hubs for pricing, whether it's Europe, whether it's the US or Japan. And the correlation has been weakened with oil as we are shifting more towards the spot pricing for natural gas rather than the long-term contracts that used to be based on fuel oil and diesel. So this is why some countries who are more exporters of natural gas had less of a shock from the decline in oil and gas prices. But this is a shock. This is a short-term shock that we will navigate. And we got to think strategically of the energy transition And we got to prepare ourselves in an energy transition world. Where do we want to compete? And what is our value proposition, where we are going to move into oil to chemicals, where we are pitching to move into exporting hydrogen and more low carbon products and from the region. And we have the competitive advantage.
That's great. Unless there are any final questions, maybe we could shift to Carol. And Carol, I can see that you're on with us as well. Let me just say thank you very much, Dr. Yahya, very informative, and lots on in our region. We're in the midst of a massive, once in a lifetime, once in a generation transformation. And we're only sort of in the early days of that, aren't we? With so much more to come as we transform from perhaps based too much on hydrocarbons to a modern, progressive economy that's much more sustainable. Thank you very much for your insights, and we'll stay in touch, of course, on all of these hot topics. So now, if you could move to Carol, if you don't mind. Carol, welcome. And Carol, you've done a lot of work on workforce of the future. Could you also give your insights on the impact of COVID and what that's done for women in the workplace, and whether it's been positive, or what are the learnings and what are the insights coming out of that? So maybe just workforce and also impact of COVID, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Hani. I'm absolutely delighted to have the chance to talk to all of you today, and I'm very proud of PwC's continued involvement with the Arab International Women's Forum. It's no exaggeration to say that COVID-19 has upended our entire world. It's altered the course of economies and societies around the globe in ways we can't fully recognize yet. Even the best predictions will be partly wrong. How we work, where work happens, how we use technology, it's all up for debate. But what we can see right now is work is being rebalanced. The mix of skills, the perceived value of skills, who has those skills and where, and how those skilled people work are changing faster than we expected. This will have massive societal implications around the world. And I think even before COVID-19, we were seeing rapidly widening skills gaps and mismatches. And I think COVID has thrown some rocket fuel on that problem. But there could be massive benefits to society of tasks being replaced by technology. We can make much better use of human talents and of the Earth's resources, but we need to let machines do what they do best. But we face a problem with inclusion. In part, it's the digital divide, those who are part of the new economy and those who aren't able to join in. They're being excluded from employment, and we really don't want to leave whole swathes of society behind. But women were already left behind across the Middle East. And I won't labour the point, you already know the challenges that women face. At 24.6%, the Middle East female labour force participation rate is the lowest in the world, about half the global average and well below Sweden at 61%. And high inequalities persist, most notably in legal protection, financial inclusion, with a significant number of women remaining unbanked. But there are some positive news too. Levels of literacy and enrollment of girls and young women in primary and tertiary education is par with men. Females, as in the same world over, tend to outperform boys at school. And in many Arab nations, change is happening. Although, of course, ministry announcements don't deliver real systemic change on their own. So as policymakers, employers, and workers grapple with the impacts of COVID on life and work, there is a clear chance that we could make work more inclusive, but that will take an enormous collective effort. So some of the key forces at play. If we think about the work of the future, we've seen whole industries massively impacted by COVID, many negatively, but some positively. So if you take airlines, hospitality, those industries have suffered massively, and it looks like they will continue to suffer for at least the next year. However, online retail delivery services have seen a real boom. And what COVID has done is it's really highlighted supply chain fragility and the need for new ways to serve customers, powered by a competitive race to automation, digitization, and platform-based and remote service delivery. We're seeing real accelerated business transformation, They're rapidly redrawing their business plans, cutting costs to survive in many cases, but reconfiguring for the future and building in organizational resilience for future crises. A lot of organizations are moving from just in case to just in time. So if we think about workforce of the future, pre-COVID, organizations were already under huge pressure on productivity and getting value from their technological investments, and really struggling to deliver on key skills. 74% of CEOs were concerned about the availability of key skills before COVID, and it won't get any easier to find some of those skills now. So why? Surely with higher unemployment, it makes talent easier to find. But it's really not quite that simple. And automate and digitize, every human worker in the value chain becomes more critical. But they have to have the right skills, and right cultural fit are vital. And that's not easy to simply hire for. So it's absolutely critical and essential that upskilling the existing workforce becomes even more important for organizations. So what skills are we talking about that organizations really need? So manual and basic cognitive skills work is expected to decline by a sixth by 2030. The need for technological skills to increase by over 50%, with social and emotional skills up by a quarter. And our own research shows that CEOs rank the transferable skills, the problem solving, the creativity and the innovation, adaptability and leadership skills as most in demand alongside digital and technical skills. But say there's also some of the most difficult skills to hire for. So what organizations are truly looking for are tech-savvy leaders to understand the possibilities, to work with ambiguity. They want technologists to implement that vision, and they want workers with the right mix of skills to use that technology. Across the world, COVID has meant that organizations had to rapidly move to remote working. And mass remote working has so far delivered unexpectedly high levels of productivity. For a lot of organizations, it's significantly reduced sick leave. It's created a shared experience. For example, it's given CEOs their first opportunity to experience remote working for themselves. It's offering up possibilities for organizations to rethink their property footprint, reconfigure their geographical footprint or their headquarters and functions. But this isn't just about outsourcing back office process to low-cost centers, but about geographically dispersing talent, where language and worker time zones are more important than ability to commute into capital cities. And access to more diverse talent pools, in addition to location, creates the ability to include those with caring responsibilities or mobility challenges. And it also helps organizations deliver on their ESG goals. So what might all of this mean for women in the Middle East? I think automation, digitization, working via online platforms, and female entrepreneurship all have the potential to increase women's participation in work. If we look at automation, over 70% of Middle East women currently are employed in low automated potential occupations. So they're employed in high skilled occupations, and those we see as not being massively disrupted. Automation of labor-intensive roles in male-dominated industries are set to open up new jobs for women. And in the Middle East, automation will create more opportunities for women than it destroys, with only 15% of roles expected to face displacement. If we look at digitization, the impact of digitization across all sectors and all occupations, new digital roles will open up, but digitization puts women at a high risk of displacement if they have no digital skills. And that is a really important point. If we look at individuals going into higher education today, there is a significantly higher number of males going into STEM type education. And at the moment, I think the global average is 17% of females. If we know that there's going to be more requirement for people to have STEM skills at work, it's absolutely critical that we nurture to go through to STEM education in higher education. If we think about online platforms, work via online platforms to include women not working due to cultural, infrastructural, or familial challenges, it will create a more flexible access to traditional jobs and new remote working opportunities. And the need to equip women with internet connectivity, technical and soft and business skills is essential to grasp this opportunity. For female entrepreneurs, it's essential that we unlock female business creation, and that will have a real ripple effect as women-led entrepreneurs hire more women. Middle East outperforms developed countries on parity in startup space. Encouraging entrepreneurism among women will help tackle disproportionately high female youth unemployment. So I'd like to leave you with 3 thoughts before we open up for questions. COVID has no doubt amplified and accelerated business and workforce transformation, and it's meaning a rethink of work, workforce, and workplace. The changes coming brought by automation, digitization, and online platform work and remote working all have the potential to bring more Arab women into the workplace. But business and policymakers need to work together to deliver on the benefits for women whilst continuing to drive economic prosperity in the region. So, Hani, I just wanted to give that brief overview, but I'm happy to open up for questions.
Thank you very much, Carol. I think there will be lots of questions coming through, and we already see a couple on the Q&A panel. Maybe I could start, and I know Haifa has questions as well, but just I heard what you said very clearly about its increased productivity. We're seeing less sick leave. It's changed the way that people work, flexible. But just asking the gender question, has COVID-19 been good for working women, or has it fallen more difficult upon them due to having to look after kids who are at home and not going to school, etc.? Do you have a perspective on that? Has this been good for working women or not really?
So I think the answer is yes and no. So I think for women that have young children and that are being asked to work remotely and they have caring responsibilities, I think it's been really challenging. And I think it's been really up to employers to recognize those challenges. And what I would say is there's some heroes and villains coming out of this crisis. So those employers that recognize the challenges that females face, that really create an environment to allow them to work through those challenges. So don't do traditional hours. Some have even created codes where it's more difficult. They know that their female staff will actually not be able to be as productive as they could be, but others haven't been quite so. So I think on the home front, if there isn't shared responsibility for childcare, I think that's been really challenging. For other females, though, we've had lots of anecdotal evidence that actually not having the rigor of physically having to be in the office and being much more flexible around how they work and where they work, they've really benefited from that. But I think it's also important to recognize that actually, when this crisis started, a lot of organizations talked about well-being, mental health, employee experience, but a lot of companies never really truly took it seriously. And there's been a huge push and a real focus around how you preserve that employee experience, how you create an environment where everybody can flourish, and how you support both your males and your females from a mental health and well-being perspective. And I think some of those initiatives that have come through have been massively helpful for females, actually. And I think they've also, from a male perspective, they've opened the eyes for some males in terms of the real challenges that females face when they're multitasking with lots of different responsibilities.
Okay, and I don't know if you see those questions, but and thanks to the audience and listeners and viewers for your engagement on this. So there's a question about AI coming through from Ragida actually around will women in particular be competing with the machines? I guess the background to the question is you've mentioned that COVID's accelerating change in the workplace and accelerating the change to digital and artificial intelligence and all the digital technologies actually. Will this mean fewer jobs going forward? I mean, what's your research telling you on this?
Yeah, I think, it's always, I think we're going through an unprecedented time. So looking back in history doesn't always tell us what's going to happen in the future. But if we look at all of the past revolutions, industrial revolutions, we know that more jobs are created than less. And I think what happens with things like AI, the data coming out of AI enables us to work in different ways. New jobs are created every year. So, if we think about will we be competing with machines and AI, my view is we have to understand holistically where humans can play a valuable part in the workplace. I talk a lot around, at the moment, we have technology augmenting humans. I genuinely believe in the future we will have humans augmenting technology. So when we talk about those innate human traits, the resilience, adaptability, leading through ambiguity, emotional intelligence, collaboration. At the moment, technology can't do any of those things. And that's what truly differentiates organizations. And I would argue those are the traits that women innately quite often carry more than men. But unless we really value and nurture those traits, then it's going to be quite challenging in the future. The big thing for me is we don't have enough females going into STEM education. So the more we automate, the more we require STEM skills, then there is a danger that females will get left behind. So there's got to be a huge push around that. But equally, I think employers have a responsibility to reskill and upskill all of their employees to make them more digitally aware and work alongside technology.
Thanks, Carol. So there's a question there on social isolation, mental health and well-being, etc. We have 6,000 employees in the Middle East at PwC, 37% of whom are women. We weren't as aware of mental health and wellness as we became during the COVID crisis. And in polling our people, it was consistent that we're happy, we're engaged, we're productive, but we're really, really tired and we're really struggling with working at home. Do you have a take on mental health and as it relates to working from home and in a lockdown, and maybe even a gender perspective on that?
Yeah, absolutely. We've done a huge amount around mental health and well-being for our employees. I think a lot of it is leading by example. So we have a number of our senior leaders talking about the challenges they're facing. First of all, it's about how you create an environment that allows people to feel confident and free to talk about how they're feeling personally. But you also need to be able to support those individuals. And you can do that in a number of different ways. We have microsites, we have fireside chats that people dial into, we create huddles and groups where people can talk about some of the challenges that they're facing. We've particularly found that it's actually the younger workers that are either living in shared accommodation or living on their own that are suffering more than those that more senior or that have more family around them. So we specifically targeted those individuals. A lot of people talk about, well, if you spend too much time investing in things like mental health and well-being programs, it can affect your overall business outcome. The statistics and data show that you can, in the right way, spend $1 on mental health. And if you do it right, you will get $3 in productivity and business value back. So, there's lots of things that you can do that can not only help your employees drive a better experience and look after the mental health and well-being of your community, but it also drives better business results and better outcomes at the end of it.
Thank you. We'll come to the question on what are the specific programs employers can do. But there's a question there, Carol, around, we've seen a lot of job losses, obviously, and Dr. Yahya mentioned that as well around the world. I think he said 250 million. It was a huge number. What does that mean for government and labor policies, labor force policies, etc., in a post-COVID world? Do we need a bigger social safety net? Do we need more flexibility? What are the implications?
Yeah, so, I think from my perspective, even before COVID, the divide between the people that had jobs and could work and the people that couldn't was huge. What COVID-19 has done is create an even bigger divide. So the real challenge is the people that are losing their jobs aren't easily redeployable into the workplace. And governments alone can't fix that problem. And I do believe this is an opportunity or a necessity for governments, businesses, NGOs, and industry bodies to come together to collectively try and solve this problem. The biggest issue is typically what skills we need in the workplace and what skills we have out there. And there is a huge mismatch between the skills we need today and the skills we need to work in the future. So looking at how you reskill at a large scale, looking at very specific areas. So how can you take people from hospitality and potentially reskill them into the caring industry, for example, where there is huge demand? So supply and demand, I think, has got to be looked at. That there's got to be an intervention by business and government and charities to really take these people and provide them with the necessary skills to enable them to participate back in the workforce. There's lots of discussion around whether we should have a universal basic income. Some countries have tried it, some haven't. I think what we're seeing is unprecedented government intervention. We've seen, lots of stimulus packages, lots of support for employers in a way that we've never seen ever. And I do think that that's going to continue, specifically when people feel that actually some of those unemployment roles are going to be short term. But the other side of that is actually, are we just delaying the inevitable? And are we creating huge debts for governments when actually there is no hope of redeploying those people into those jobs further down the line? So it's a really complicated issue, but it's something that I believe we should all be having a discussion about. And I know in the UK, for example, we're talking very closely with the UK government around specific projects that they need to focus on, bearing in mind either regionally or actually in specific sectors, how you can take whole swathes of individuals and redeploy them and reskill them.
Fantastic. Haifa, did you have a question for Carol? I'm conscious that you said you wanted to ask Carol something.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. Welcome to our webinar today.
Thank you.
Very insightful remarks. Actually, I want to pick up just now from what you were saying about the importance of skilling, upskilling, reskilling, both everybody in the workforce to be able to enter the job market. But you mentioned the collaboration of governments, but don't you see there is also a need for collaboration between universities and industry? This is where we need to also connect what are the skills that are needed in the market. Universities on their own are not equipped to perhaps have their finger on the pulse. When you are working with university, with industry, you will be able to get what is required. So I'd like your input of that, please. And then I'll have another point on women in the economy, please.
Yes, I completely agree with you. I would argue very much that the education system, right from the beginning, right through to university, is not providing the right skills for people to be productive in the workplace. And I think one of the big challenges, specifically for education and universities, is they're designed to move very slowly. So, as the world evolves and as the business needs evolve, they're not keeping up with the needs that the business has. And what we're seeing is really interesting is there is a huge upsurge in organizations and companies that are emerging to fill the gap between what university provides and what business needs. And whilst that's really interesting and entrepreneurial and lots of people are making money out of that, the fundamental issue is we have to go back to basics. Now, I sit on the World Economic Task Forum for Skills and Education, and it's really fascinating to me, looking around the world, how some governments are really tackling the skills gap at the school level. So if you look at, I can't remember which country it is, but they have more cybersecurity specialists as women than they do men. And that's because they had an intervention at a primary school all the way through education. So you have to go back to the basics. The one issue we have though, Haifa, is that, we don't have the luxury of changing our entire education system. It will take too long to do. So what are the interventions that we can make along the way? And that's where I believe that governments with industry, with big organizations can start making those interventions where those moments that really matter. But there is no doubt that the skills that are coming out of university are not necessarily the skills that are needed. in the job market. And actually, most of the money from venture capital at the moment has moved from medtech into edtech. So lots of education technology is bubbling up specifically to meet that need.
Haifa, you said you had another question?
If I may. Yeah. I wanted to also come back to women. In the MENA, we are seeing more and more women entering into STEM studies. We're really proud of that. And we also, when we look at the tech park already set up in Lebanon, in Jordan, at the American University of Beirut, for example, you see many of the women, there is young women entrepreneurs who are really tech entrepreneurs. So this gives us a lot of hope that we have our young women leaders ready to move with the times. And I mean, COVID has thrown us all immediately into the future in terms of using the technology and adopting technology. Right. So women are perhaps prepared. And I'm happy to see them engaged in tech entrepreneurships. I'm also happy to see them also more engaged in the agri-tech, as I was discussing with Dr. Yahya in prior to your joining. But we have 100 million youth in the region. We need to find them jobs and urgently. And so how is the region going to address this issue? This problem existed long before COVID. Of course, COVID has exacerbated it. And we have educated youth. There are many are well educated, but they're not able to find jobs. So could you please charter us through best addressing this issue that pertains to our young people? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's an enormous issue, and I'm afraid I don't just have a magic bullet to solve the problem. I think, you know, where jobs aren't readily available, how do you allow people to create their own jobs? And that requires entrepreneurship. But it also requires funding, and it requires specific backing and potentially grants from things like governments, for example. And I always use the example of South Korea, which is quite a strange example, but I spent quite a bit of time talking to the Minister of Labour in South Korea, and they had probably about 8 years ago, they realized and recognized that the majority of their economy came from manufacturing, but most of that manufacturing was going to be automated. And they were going to have massive swathes of people that were going to be unemployed, both male and female. So they started a program of intervention, working with investors, working with corporates, and working with the government to basically create a number of different incentives to allow people to start their own jobs, to start their own businesses, and create their own economies. And that did a number of things. So one, it created a huge entrepreneurial environment where there'd never been one before. Two, it actually stopped a whole wave of people being made redundant when potentially they would have nothing else to do. And three, they set about a systematic program of reskilling those people to where they knew the needs were. So that just gives you one example of how a country kind of tackled that. I mean, the other thing for me that I get very frustrated about is if you look at all of the money from private equity and venture capital, you know, if you look at where that goes, the majority typically goes to male-dominated investments, and not nearly enough goes to female entrepreneurs. But actually, if you look at the statistics, the money that's invested in the female entrepreneurs, typically the return is far greater than the male counterpart. So again, actually working with venture capital, private equity, and all of those investment houses to incentivize them and encourage them to work more with female entrepreneurs, I think will help as well. But there isn't a magic bullet, but it's just thinking a bit laterally, thinking outside the box, and trying to encourage people to kind of create the opportunities, their own businesses, and that in themselves creates demand. I mean, one of the things we've seen in a lot of territories, you know, even before this crisis, is the whole concept of provenance. So, you know, a lot of people are shopping more locally. They want to know where their things are made. They want to be able to kind of support their local community. So we've seen a real, resurgence of people actually supporting each other and starting their own businesses and collaborating together. And I think we're going to see much more of that.
That's great. Thank you, Carol. And I'm glad you brought in South Korea as an example. It is often cited in our region as a country that doesn't have natural resources, as an example, but created a vibrant economy and invested in the future, in education and in entrepreneurs, and gave grants, etc. So I'm glad that you cited that one. It is often used in our region. So with that, perhaps I could thank you, Carol, very much for joining us today, for your insights, Dr. Yahya as well. And Haifa, really over to you as we conclude today. But many thanks to Carol and Yahya for joining today.
Thank you, Hani. Thank you, Dr. Yahya. Thank you, Carol. Really, I would, what my comment would be, I wish we had another, at least half an hour. There is much more we can learn from both Dr. Yahya, from Carol, from you, Hani, on all these very key and important issues. But anyway, I am very grateful. I am totally, I believe we all are better informed. And we know that you're also working with governments in the region, so that gives us a lot of hope for how things can move forward, inshallah, quickly and for the better, for our young women and our young men, and for the prosperity, stability of the region. Thank you all very much. Thank you again, Hani. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Dr. Yahya. Thank you.
Thank you.